in this story, I'm going to talk about something that my girlfriend told me about a few days ago. I was in the kitchen chopping tomatoes and onions and stuff, and she comes in and says, "Hey, did you hear that the UK was going to be sending refugees to Rwanda?" And I said, "What? That doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make any fucking sense." And she's like, "Yeah, it's true." And I said, "No, it can't be true." And then upon further research, of course it's fucking true, because this is the world that we live in. So as you guys know, that this is a real thing. The UK will be deporting people to Rwanda, which is a small country in Central or East Africa, however you define it. This is a story that's been widely circulated and other people have talked about it. I'm going to give my commentary, but before I do, I want to start with this article from Sky News about Ukraine. So, Ukraine war. Former Housing Secretary Robert Yenrik, MP, is first to take in families of Ukrainian refugees. Priti Patel is so damn fine. God damn, she's so fine. Has apologized for the slow start to the Homes for Ukraine scheme, which Robert Yenrik said was overly bureaucratic. This was published on Saturday, April 16th, 2022. This is Robert Yenrik, and I assume this is his wife or family, and the Ukrainian family is somewhere here. Once again, cannot tell who's British or Ukrainian. Please, people, please make note of that whenever I talk about Black issues abroad, that, you know, generally speaking, phenotypical differences make people distinct. Continuing, I shall continue to read. All right, the Tory MP for Newark took in 40-year-old Maria and her two children, Christina and Bowden, 15, earlier this week, and is understood to be the first MP to take in refugees under the Homes for Ukraine scheme. I'm not going to click the video. So the former cabinet minister, who lives with his wife and three children, criticized the scheme and said it could have been made simpler. "I do think the process has been overly bureaucratic, and I think the Home Office often falls into this trap," he said in the Daily Telegraph's Choppers Politics podcast. "There were simple things that we could and should have done from the outset, like having the form in Ukrainian, for example." Speaking about the visa process, he added, "Truth be told, it has been a bumpy start to the scheme. It's taken too long to get visas. For us, it took about 3 weeks to get all 3 visas approved." Mr. Yenrik added that the family's father was remaining in Ukraine to support the war effort and that the process took around 3 weeks to obtain the visas needed. So, before I continue reading, I want to say that Robert, Mr. Yenrik, is doing a good thing. He's showing compassion, humanitarianism to this family in need. And he's saying that the bureaucracy that was in place made it harder for him to do something good. I'm not here to fault anybody for wanting to help anybody who's in need. And please, let's remember, he said that the process could have been easier by having it in Ukrainian, not having it have so much red tape, etc. And I think we can all learn from that and agree that when people are in need and people are in dire straits, they do deserve our compassion. So what is the Homes for Ukraine scheme? Well, the Homes for Ukraine scheme, which opened on March 18th, allows British people to host Ukrainian refugees, even if they have no previous ties to the UK. Here's a tweet from the Department for Leveling Up Housing and Communities. New, over 20,000 visas now have been issued under the Homes for Ukraine scheme. The scheme is for people fleeing Ukraine who have a sponsor in the UK to provide them with a home. Apply online. Here, stand with Ukraine. 20,000 people plus. So they're advertising how many people have applied and how many people want to come. And they're making it much easier, tweeting about it, letting people know you can do it online. So in the scheme, anyone with a room or home available for at least 6 months can offer it to a Ukrainian individual or a family, with hosts being vetted and Ukrainian refugees undergoing security checks. Government figures show as of Wednesday, 25,100 visas have been issued under the scheme from 55,600 applicants. However, only 12.7% of visa holders have arrived in the UK. The scheme has been criticized for a slow rollout, which also led to an apology from the Home Secretary, Priti Patel. The UN Refugee Agency has also raised concerns over risks to women in the scheme, adding that it was aware of increasing reports of female refugees feeling at risk from male sponsors. more than 200,000 people in Britain have applied to host refugees under the scheme. So there's a lot to unpack here just with this, because a lot of what was said in this article relates to a lot from what I've been talking about in my previous videos. Number one, let's look at this fact. Only 12.7% of visa holders have arrived in the UK. So out of, those 20,000 people that applied, only a small minority have actually gone there, which proves my point that I said in my previous video talking about social and political stuff. Not everybody wants to go to Europe. Not everybody wants to go to London and be in Paris and stuff like that. Most people don't want to leave their country, leave their homes. Most people want to stay where the fuck they're from. So this paranoia about letting people into developed countries, thinking that they're just going to overrun the country, suck up the social resources, and just bleed the country dry is all bullshit. People fleeing a war don't even want to go to the UK. And they're not specifying whether it's because they haven't gotten there yet or whether they've changed their mind or found another host country, but they applied for this visa, got it, and still many of them didn't want to go. And the UK is a very, very developed, rich nation, and people still fleeing a war don't want to go. So this goes to the point that I've been saying in my previous videos. If people want to immigrate to your country, you should be welcoming them and accepting them, because number one, we live in a world with declining birth rates, and many countries in the world can't even keep up their own populations. And the capitalist world that we live in is dependent upon people constantly working and constantly producing productivity, which makes our societies run. But if your society is getting older and older and all the young people want to leave, or they're not getting married or not having kids, the first thing you should be doing is welcoming refugees, economic migrants, whoever, regardless of where they're from, because we're all human on this planet. And people have many other choices. I don't know exactly how many countries in the world, but roughly people have around 200 or so options. And if people choose your country, you should take that as a sign of, you should be grateful for that. Show some gratitude. And secondly, the UN Refugee Agency has pointed out concerns of risks to women coming to these places. As we all know, in Ukraine, the Ukrainian government was not allowing men to leave their country. They had to stay and fight. So many of the refugees leaving Ukraine are women, the elderly, and children. But the UN Refugee Agency is saying that these women are coming, being hosted by these families, and some might be sexually assaulted, abused, and that sort of thing, right? I want you to keep that point in mind, because when we read this story, and I'm going to click over it here now, about this one-way ticket to Rwanda for some UK asylum seekers, which was posted 2 days ago on the BBC. They're going to talk about how this program is aimed mostly at men. Now, why are men constantly the ones being targeted as the ones to be deported, the ones to not be welcomed into countries if they are refugees or migrants? It comes from the fear and paranoia that people have about conquerors and invaders entering their space. People think if they have young men in their country, they're going to be more likely to commit crime, hurt people, and that sort of thing. And yes, in some degree, that is actually followed up by some statistics. But as we all know, the other statistics that show refugees and migrants are the ones who are least likely to commit crime and hurt people in the country that they go to. I've said this before. If you're going to be robbed, murdered in your country, most likely the person doing it will not be a refugee. It will be a person who is a citizen born in your own country. Okay? Now, anyway, let's continue reading. Some asylum seekers who cross the channel to the UK will be given a one-way ticket to Rwanda under new government plans. The pilot scheme will focus on single men arriving on boats or lorries. Prime Minister Boris Johnson said the £120 million scheme would save countless lives from human trafficking. Refugee organizations have criticized the plan as cruel. They questioned its cost and impact and raised concerns about Rwanda's human rights record. Mr. Johnson said action was needed to stop vile people smugglers turning the ocean into a watery graveyard, with the plan designed to break their business model. Our compassion may be infinite, but our capacity to help people is not. he said. We can't ask the British taxpayer to write a blank check to cover the costs of anyone who might want to come and live here. I don't understand this, Mr. Boris Johnson. So the British people, by the way, I'm not a British citizen, but I'm saying, with your own words, the British people can't afford to write a blank check to help people who want to come and live in the UK. But they do have the ability to literally open up their homes and host Ukrainian refugees. This doesn't make sense. This is a contradiction. So the British taxpayers, by the way, who will still have to pay taxes regardless, most of the time in democracies, citizens don't know where our tax dollars go. As a U.S. citizen, my tax dollars help to fund apartheid in Israel. So, that's not something I agree with. But I agree with helping refugees. But you're telling me that my tax dollars can't go towards that, but I can open up my home to Ukrainian refugees. I don't understand. This doesn't make sense. This is ridiculous. Those who succeed in making it to the UK will be taken not to hotels at vast public expense, the Prime Minister said, and instead would be housed in detention centers. So we have detention centers for people who are risking their lives trying to seek a better life. Meanwhile, Ukrainian refugees, who a small minority don't even want to come to your country when they can easily apply online, are welcomed into the homes. What is this world that we live in? Speaking in Kent, he said the new plan would, over time, prove a very considerable deterrent. Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer described the scheme as unworkable and extortionate, claiming it was an attempt to distract from Mr. Johnson's Partygate fine. And this is another sad thing. People use humans as a way to get what they want and for political gain and expediency. This reminds me, a few months ago, before the war in Ukraine, the president of Belarus had refugees at the border and was threatening to let them loose across the EU if they didn't lift sanctions on Belarus. And my theory about the war in Ukraine is that Russia purposefully wanted to make Ukrainians leave and turn them into refugees to leave the country to help destabilize Europe, because many of the things that happened a few years ago with the refugee crisis, with the refugees coming from Syria and Afghanistan, resulted in right-wing, pro-Putin politicians becoming elected, like we saw with Hungary and like we're seeing in France right now with Marine Le Pen possibly being elected. Right-wing governments tend to side with Putin, and right-wing governments often come to power after there's a refugee crisis or a mass influx of foreign people in the country. So this is just sad how in this world people are used in such ways for political gain and for power and prestige. It's really sad, really sad. I'm continuing reading. So last year, 28,526 people are known to have crossed in small boats, up from 8,404 in 2020. About 600 people made the crossing on Wednesday. The figure could reach 1,000 a day in coming weeks, Mr. Johnson said. The number of people who can be relocated will be unlimited, said Mr. Johnson. So there's an unlimited amount of people that we're going to deport who are fighting and dying to get into our country. And then there's an unlimited amount of space for Ukrainians who want to sleep in the homes. And there's an unlimited amount of space specifically for Ukrainian women and children who will be welcomed into these British homes. Rwanda will have the capacity to resettle tens of thousands of people in the years ahead, including those who have arrived illegally since the start of the year, he said. All right, we cannot sustain a parallel illegal system, said the Prime Minister. Our compassion may be infinite, but our capacity to help people is not. Home Secretary Priti Patel, she's so damn fine, who traveled to Rwandan capital Kigali to sign the deal, said it was a global first and it will change the way we collectively tackle illegal migration. She said the vast majority of those arriving in the UK illegally would be considered for relocation to Rwanda. I would like to know, and nobody's spoken about this, I don't know why anybody's talking about this, what does Rwanda get out of this deal? Are they getting, money from the UK? I know I spoke previously in my previous video about the EU having a fund for African countries to help stem the migration flow. And we all know that a few years ago, Libya was the place that they would send refugees who were caught in the Mediterranean. They would send them back to Libya, unfortunately, and those people would face human rights abuses. I would really like to know what Rwanda gets out of this deal. And I also think a big part of why this story made such a splash is because of how odd it is, but also how people view Africa in this racist lens. When people hear about a country like Rwanda and they say, we're going to send people to Rwanda, they almost make it sound like they're sending them to hell. And this is a sick way that people view the African continent. People view African countries as so undeveloped, so terrible, and so bad that if you send somebody there, it's almost like a death sentence. And it's absolutely not the case. Rwanda is a developing nation, but it's much better than many other developing nations in the world. It's one of the cleanest countries in the world. They've had a stable government. They haven't had a civil war in many years. It's relatively safer than the U.S. I don't understand why people, continue to show their bias and their racism by saying these African countries like Rwanda, which is, one of the top tier African countries, is like a place that nobody should be sent to, as if that's such a crime, right? Honestly, send me to Rwanda before you send me to, I don't know, Moldova. No offense to Moldova, but better weather, better food. Recent research by Ipsos Mori suggested 60% of the public were dissatisfied with the government's migration policy, more than half of which cited channel crossings. So people crossing the English Channel in boats in 2019, it was way less than 5,000. In 2021, from the start of January, it's up to more than 25,000, close to 30,000. And yeah, here in 2022, yeah. All right, so in 2019, it was around 2,000. 2020, around 10,000 or so, little less than 10,000. 2021 was around 35,000, and in 2022 it was around 5,000. So BBC Home editor Mark Easton, reporting from Rwanda, said ministers would face legal hurdles and substantial costs to launch the scheme. Precise details of the plan are yet to be confirmed, but he said the trial would be restricted to mostly single men. Once again, single men are the focus of why our immigration policy is built around. And to say it's sexist would be an abuse of the word sexism, because as we know, sexism is about power, just like racism is about power. And men generally in the world have more power than most women. But this targeted focus on men is unfair, because men face a lot of the same problems too in the world. Men can be abused. Men can be, targets of violence. Men can be exploited, not to the same extent or degree as women can. But, just because I'm a man seeking asylum and there's a woman seeking asylum, my claim to asylum is no less just because I have a penis. It shouldn't be like that. Under the proposal, Rwanda would take responsibility for the people who made the more than 4,000-mile journey, put them through an asylum process, and at the end of that process, if they were successful, they would have a long-term accommodation in Rwanda. The BBC has seen accommodation the asylum seekers would be housed in, thought to have enough space for about 100 people at a time and to process up to 500 a year. That's a very, very small amount. And if we're talking about, at the very peak of 2021, close to, 30,000 people were crossing, and maybe, let's say, half of those were deported to Rwanda, these facilities would not be enough. And these facilities look like a low-rent hotel. This is a picture. Journalists were given a tour of a typical government refugee facility in Rwanda. The Rwandan government said migrants will be entitled to full protection under Rwandan law, equal access to employment, and enrollment in healthcare and social care services. The UK Home Office believes existing asylum law will be enough to implement the plan, but questions remain about the legality of the scheme. Mr. Johnson said the plan was fully compliant with international law, but acknowledged he expected it to be subject to challenge in the courts and from a formidable army of politically motivated lawyers. So these are comments from BBC Radio 5 listeners. What's crueler, that or being drowned? If it saves one life, surely it's got to be better than what's happening with these migrants now. Lorraine from Dartington. How are we treating these humans? Are we suddenly saying those coming from Ukraine, their lives are better value than those coming from certain other countries? I think it's abhorrent, said Hamid from Bicester. This is the crazy thing. It seems like the only people who are pointing out the hypocrisy are the colored or darker people of the planet, or the people who are coming from non-European countries. I would like some white person, somebody, please tell me why you guys are, purposefully turning a blind eye to the hypocrisy that happens. It seems like unless you're of Arab descent, Central Asian descent, African descent, nobody else seems to point out how the Ukrainians get the open door policy. Meanwhile, everybody else, you're getting slammed shut at the gates. Sad. I feel it's a shame. We seem to have eroded this idea of fairness in our nation. We seem to no longer want to be the nation that wants to help other people. It seems a shame we've lost those values in our country. Chris of Devon. Let's forget about the optics and actually look at the reality. People smugglers will keep trying to find different ways until we break it. That's the cruel part here. I applaud the government for having some backbone. British Red Cross Executive Director Zoe Abrams said the humanitarian network was profoundly concerned about the scheme and that the financial and human cost will be considerable. Enver Solomon, chief executive of the Refugee Council, said the charity was appalled by the government's cruel and nasty decision, which it said would do little to deter people from coming to the UK. Miranda Butler, a barrister who specializes in immigration law, said there were serious questions about the risks faced by migrants under this expedited process. The Lib Dems said the government was slamming the door in the face of refugees, while the SNP's Ian Blackford described the plan as absolutely chilling. So this is a visual representation of the UK to Rwanda. And for the record, this, once again, is the EU, not the EU, because the UK left the EU, but a European nation wasting possibly billions of dollars on a stupid program that, in this case, could have been used in different ways. There are so many benefits to having raw human capital wanting to enter your country. It's almost like people begging to work at your company. It makes no sense to export these people 4,000 miles across the world when they are showing the willingness and the fight and the desire, sometimes even more than people who are born in that country, to want to contribute to that country, to stay in that country and love and cherish that country. This makes no sense. I know I'm very progressive in my views about immigration right now, but hopefully, and I know this for a fact, in 100, 200 years from now, the views that I have right now about immigration, people should be allowed to move wherever they want to be. The world should have open borders. These things that I believe now in my heart will become the standard in 100 and 200 years. And that will only come from people realizing that we are all on this planet together. We are not going to move forward and progress as a society if we continue to fight and discriminate and hurt each other. We need to appreciate and love each other. That's my main message in these videos. All right. Questions have been raised over the human rights record of the Rwandan government and its president, Paul Kagame. Last year, the UK government expressed concern at the United Nations over continued restrictions to civil and political rights and media freedom in Rwanda. But Mr. Johnson described Rwanda as being one of the safest countries in the world. Other countries, including Ascension Island and Gibraltar, had also been considered. The Prime Minister had announced asylum seekers who are resettled in the UK will be spread more evenly across local authorities. Plans to hand operational control to the Channel to the Royal Navy. £50 million in funding for new equipment and specialist personnel for Channel operations. A new government facility to house migrants described as a reception center in Linton on Ouse North Yorkshire, a maximum sentence of life imprisonment for people smugglers. The government's nationality and borders bill is making its way through Parliament, but time is running out to pass it into law after a series of defeats in the House of Lords. MPs are currently working on a break, but when they return, they are due to review a series of amendments, including one about power to offshore asylum claims. All right. So I want to end with this. Let's see if I can play this video with no ads. Will I be able? Doesn't matter. I don't care. So I want to end with this part. Countries shouldn't waste money deporting people. It's just a waste of money. There are better ways to use the billions of dollars on deportation and sending people to countries or places where they could possibly be killed or persecuted. It's not humane. It's not right. There are people who want to contribute to countries when they move and immigrate. Nobody wants to hop on a dinghy and sail across the English Channel and possibly die to come and destroy your country. Nobody wants to do that. And the hypocrisy of how we are treating refugees from some countries, comparing it to how we are treating Ukrainian refugees, it's just blatant and it needs to stop. And the view that male refugees and people who are men coming into a country are the threat to that civilization is not right either. Everybody should have the right to seek peace, safety, and comfort everywhere in the world. And I know my views might seem extreme now, but I know one day in the future, maybe long after I'm gone, the views that I'm expressing now will be the ones that the majority of people hold in the world. I know, or I believe, either one, that 200 years from now, they're going to look back on how we treated refugees from Africa, from Asia, from Latin America as barbaric and inhumane. They're going to look back at us the same way we look back on colonizers and slaveholders.